Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for Out Leadership Equality Imperative podcast. So this is part of a series of virtual events that we have been hosting. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, we had Mayor Sean Straub, a very famous HIV activist and the mayor of the city of Milford in Pennsylvania, who talked to us about HIV as well, the criminalization of HIV, but also the interconnection with COVID-19. Well, today I am delighted to welcome Michael Adams, with the executive director of SAGE. Before I introduce Michael, I wanted to take a moment to thank our corporate sponsors for today's events, which include American Express, EY, PwC, KPMG, Moody's, Mizuho, PGIM, and Greenberg Traurig. So I am delighted to have this conversation today because I think that ageism has been a huge topic around COVID-19, and then I've been writing extensively about the specific burden of COVID-19 on our community, and of course on the elder LGBT community. So I think to most of you, I don't really need to introduce Michael Adams. He has been a pillar of the community for many years. He went through Lambda Legal. He was at the ACLU, and he has been showing tremendous leadership on the question of LGBT aging, which is a huge question for our community for many reasons, which I hope we will have the opportunity to discuss in the podcast today. But now I have to say that Michael Adams is not only a leader on LGBT aging, he's a leader on aging in general, and is now the chair of the American Society on Aging. So we're extremely privileged to have him here. So thank you so much for joining, Mike.
Sure, I'm happy to be here, Fabrice.
So I'm going to jump immediately into my first question. My first question won't be specific to LGBT elders. It will be kind of general on older people on COVID-19. We have seen a movement which is basically blaming the confinement on older people. So a lot of us had seen kind of a shocking statement by the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, but I wrote a piece yesterday about the fact that in France there is a philosopher called André Comte-Sponville, who has been saying that it is time to deconfine, and that it is a shame to sacrifice young people economic opportunities to the health of older people. And I wanted to read you a quote in which he said, "I wonder what is it about this society which is making its old people the priority of priorities." So I would be very interested, Michael, to hear your views on this. And what would you respond to someone who is saying that we are sacrificing our economy to protect the health of older people?
Well, statements like that are deeply troubling, and frankly, I think are a reflection of deep ageism in our societies, because the reality is that perspective is completely disconnected from the facts and the realities that we are seeing every day. The steps and measures that governments have taken in terms of shutdowns and stay-at-home orders and quarantines, those are not just to protect older people. The fact is, if you look at the demographics of who is getting sick with COVID-19, it's people of every age in society. Sure, older folks are more vulnerable, but we see people of every age getting sick. We see people of every age dying. So we start off with the fact that that kind of a statement is completely disconnected from the realities of COVID-19. And it also is disconnected from the reality that we live in a multi-generational society, and we are enriched by people of all ages. I think embedded in that notion and in that observation is the idea that somehow older people are expendable, but they have done what they're going to do for society and it's time to move on. That's not the case. Older people are continuing to make incredible contributions. There are luminaries, there are mentors, there are leaders in many cases, there are volunteers, there are philanthropists. There are so many contributions that our elders and older people continue to make to society. And frankly, even if that were not the case, which it is, but even if that were not the case, as a society, we have such a moral debt to older people who have paved the way for us. We talk about this at SAGE in the LGBT community. That's certainly true for our community, but it's true in every community and in every part of society. And the notion that we would just toss aside those who have essentially created the society in which we live in and made it what it is astonishing. And when do we become expendable? You know, I'm 59 years old. Do I become expendable at 60 or 65 or 70? It's such an offensive and dangerous notion, and such a horrible us versus them kind of approach, and exactly the wrong approach if we want to tackle and overcome a public health crisis like COVID-19.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Do you think that there is maybe an intentional or unconscious way of trying to scapegoat what is a difficult situation, both economic and emotional, on older people?
Oh, I absolutely think so. I mean, sadly, and I'm more familiar with the context of the US than France, but certainly in the US, we have a long and unfortunate tradition of looking for scapegoats to try to blame when we face big crises. I mean, you know, we see that coming from a whole variety of sectors in our society. We see it coming now when our person in the White House and others try to scapegoat the Chinese and immigrants, etc. This is a long, sad tradition in the U.S., and certainly it's not limited to the U.S. It's a classic scapegoating approach, and it's really unfortunate because it does nothing to address the problems that we need to address in this crisis.
So Michael, you made this great point that older people tend to be luminaries, they tend to be leaders, that they play a key role in our society. At Out Leadership, we have pointed out the loss that happened to us of some important figures in our community, such as the playwright Terrence McNally, the activist Lorena Borjas in Queens, or even Tarlac McNiales, who played a key role in getting LGBT people to enter the Irish parade every year, the St. Patrick's Day parade. So I have two questions for you. First of all, you did mention that the LGBT community, its elder community, was already depleted. And I would love for you to give us a little bit of the background of the reason why that is. And then the second aspect is, of course, you know, I'm very interested to hear whether you believe that there has been an impact of COVID-19 on our elder community, and you know, what is the status of our community on it?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, historically, we are, as an LGBT community, we're a community that really has suffered in many ways from the lack of connections across generations, right? And that's something that many of us are working hard to change, because people of all ages are hurt, right? When we don't lift up older people, when there are not opportunities for older people and younger people to enrich each other's lives. And there are all kinds of reasons why those gaps have existed in our community. Some of that is about ageism in our own community. Some of that is about the fact that we lost a generation of older people through the AIDS epidemic and other reasons as well. I think we started to make some really wonderful progress in terms of rebuilding those connections across generations. And now we're confronting this new crisis, right, with COVID-19, where we're losing people as a community, including older people, not just older people, but including older people, and will continue to. And I think, you know, it's going to take probably quite a while for us to fully understand and have a good measure of the damage that this public health crisis is doing and will do to the LGBT community. But we already see it in the loss of so many community members. There are people like Terrence and Lorena and Tarlak who are prominent and known in many parts of our community as being leaders. And then, of course, there are many folks whose names we wouldn't recognize, but are also very important to the fabric of the community. Certainly at SAGE, we have lost a number of constituents to COVID-19 over these last several weeks. We have other folks who are sick. But again, to that point that this is a pandemic that affects people of all ages, it's not just our elder constituents who are sick. We have people on our staff who have been sick. We have volunteers of all ages who have been sick. So it's a tough time. At the same time, I will say, and we can talk about this more, so much is happening in our community and so much is happening within the SAGE community that is inspiring. The way that we come together and care for each other in this crisis and the AIDS crisis before it is really, it's heartwarming and it's inspiring, and it's why we continue forward. So I'd love to talk about that over the course of our time together too.
Yeah, there's actually a question that came across about loneliness in aging, and that's going to me, it's going to come back to that point you made, that there is some ageism in our community. You said there is some ageism in our community too. I'm tempted to say there is even more ageism in our community than in other communities. And so my question to you would be, it's true that when I came out, the first thing that my father said is that it's easy to be gay and young, but when you age, you will be lonely, and it's difficult to age as a gay man, which has always been in the back of my mind as I started aging as a gay man. Do you feel, Michael, that sometimes the last thing that LGBT people want to think about is becoming old?
Well, I'll tell you a little, anecdote from way back when I was in my early 20s, and the first time I came to New York City for a Pride parade, and I was 22, 23 years old, and was watching the parade with my boyfriend at the time, and all of a sudden this bus, the SAGE bus, came by with all of these old people on the bus, and it kind of blew me away because I couldn't even imagine putting together the idea at that age, right? Putting together the idea of being old and being a gay man. And obviously a lot has changed for me personally and our community over time. I do think that yes, there absolutely is ageism within our community. And there is isolation and high levels of isolation among older people in our community. But that's not because it has to be that way by definition. I think the challenge that we face as a community is that in our society and in many societies, as people get older, often their social circle and their support circle changes, right? Especially if they get to advanced age and are less able to get out and around, etc. And that in our society, it tends to become, as people get older, traditional family members, adult children and spouses, etc., grandchildren, that become the social support and the support network for elders in our society as a whole. But that's not true for many people in our community who are older now. This will change over time, right? But right now we know that among the elders that SAGE and our partner organizations work with across the country, the elders of current generations are much less likely to be parents. They're actually 4 times less likely to be parents. They're twice as likely to be single and living alone as they grow older. So those things lead to isolation. But it doesn't need to be that way, right? I mean, and this, I think, is our challenge and our opportunity as a community, is to reimagine what it looks like to get older, so that it is not a choice between being in a family with kids and grandchildren or being alone. It doesn't need to be that way. And actually, Fabrice, I would say, the flip side of ageism in our community, one of the most inspiring things that I see There are so many younger people in our community who come forward and volunteer to work in SAGES programs in New York City across the country. Thousands of younger people step forward, right? And that's the key right there. We can build those social connections in that social fabric so that people are not alone and not isolated as they get old. But we haven't kind of fulfilled that task yet. And so we do face a lot of issues with social isolation among elders now. But we can change that, and we are little by little, although obviously this crisis makes it much harder.
Well, and you know what I love, you point out the fact that children play often for a heterosexual peer a bigger role when they age. Similarly, you talk about spouses and the fact that it's true that for LGBT people, achieving long-lasting relationship can be difficult because of the burden of society, homophobia and transphobia. But I would also add that we tend to be kicked out of our community, and we also tend to be kicked out of our of places of worship, right? A lot of us have to leave our faith of origin, and it's sometimes difficult to come back and find a new community of faith. But ultimately, it asks the question of how do you create community? How do you create a long-lasting network of people that will accompany you through life? Do you think that, I mean, it's a little bit off topic, but do you think that you have recommendation to younger LGBT people on how to create community?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the challenges that we see with many elders in our community now is that they did create, what we sometimes call families of choice, right? They may not have had kids. They might be disconnected from their families of origin, from their communities of origin, but most folks in our community have created really robust circles of friends. The challenge is, and this is common, this is not unique to us as LGBT people, but the challenge is, for the most part, people created circles of friends who were their same age, right? In the same, in the same age bracket. And so if I am 80 years old and all of my friends are between 75 and 85 years old, as I get older, my social circle is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and those folks are going to be dealing with the same challenges in aging that I'm dealing with, and they might be less helpful in terms of being able to be supportive. So I think that probably the fundamental recommendation that I would make is for each of us, at whatever age we're at, to be conscious of trying to build circles of friends who are of all different ages, to build a multi-generation circle of friends, to make our family of choice multi-generational, so that as we get older, we can take care of each other, right? So that there are people younger than us in our circles who are going to watch out for us and have our back, and that we're going to look up to the people who are older than us, and we're going to have their back and take care of them, right? So I think that's the key. At SAGE, we started a program called SAGE Table, which brings younger and older people together to share meals together, to sit down at the table and have dinner or lunch together. And that's the whole point, is to recognize that we want to build our families of choice across all ages. If we do that, then our old age will look really different and much better and much more socially connected than it does for many of our elders now.
Yes, so that is the question that Avi, which is kind of a follow-up question that Avi Lidvok put in the question space here, which is, of course, as individual, we can try to create this intergenerational link by paying attention to people of different age in our social network. But the question from Avi is there people that are working towards creating infrastructure or spaces in which we can meet people from other generations? Meaning that if you are doing CrossFit, which is a big socializing thing for LGBT people, or if you are doing Kickball League, or if you are doing a book club, it tends to be focused on your generation. What do you think are the spaces where LGBT people can meet people of other generation, knowing that for our heterosexual peers, it kind of happens naturally through maybe the church, or it happens naturally through the family, or maybe it happens naturally through villages or neighborhoods of which we are kicked out.
Yeah.
So where do we meet our
Yeah.
elders if we don't
Yeah.
have this infrastructure?
I think what you're saying, Fabrice, in the question hits the nail on the head, is that we as a community don't have the benefit of those kind of automatic structures that come from traditional family, church, etc. So we have to create them. And we are starting to see the creation of some infrastructure and intentional spaces. I mentioned a program that Sage has called Sage Connect, that's about people sharing meals together. We also have a mentoring program in development that we call it speed mentoring. It's kind of like speed dating, where people of different ages come together and over the course of the evening match up as mentors. There are also, in addition to the work that Sage is doing around building intergenerational connections, there are initiatives and projects starting to spout up around the country. So for example, in New York City, which is where I'm based, there's an organization called the Generations Project. And the Generations Project was started by younger members of the LGBT community. And its purpose is to bring younger and older people together to share life experiences, to share stories, to exchange notes. They do it through different events. It's a really fantastic project. And it's the kind of thing that we have to support and encourage. So those are the kinds of intentionally created spaces that are going to make this difference. And it will be a combination. It'll be a combination of what we do personally in our own lives, right? And then what we can do at the community level to create these spaces for people to come together across generations.
And, I love that. I have to say that, which is also a bit of a sideline comment, but we are going to talk about the lessons learned from COVID-19. And what I feel is that in a context where it's pretty clear that professional and financial success are going to be more difficult, we can find joy in life in other aspects, such as community. And I think that's why efforts to create community and to create a meaningful connection, particularly after a time in which we saw how much we crave for connection, I think those efforts will be very valued in the post-COVID-19 world.
Yeah,
so to come back to COVID-19, because we stepped away for a minute, I know that your organization has been calling 2,000 older LGBT people every day. First of all, I would be fascinated to know how you can do that. Is that a network of volunteers or is that staff member? And also, it means that you're taking the pulse of our older community. As you mentioned before, older people tend to be already isolated in general, particularly in our community, and I imagine even more in the context of COVID-19. So how is our community doing, and can you talk to us about your initiatives?
Sure. So, one of the biggest challenge, and we've already alluded to this, is the fact that we're all isolated more so than usual because we're being forced to stay at home. And we don't have the kind of connections we do, but that's especially difficult for our elders because in many cases, their social circles, their support circles are much smaller, right? So they don't have the ways to reach out and get connected, and they're at a lot of risk. And so a big focus for Sage has been, how do we as an organization stay in touch with older members of our community who we believe are particularly at risk. So in New York City, Sage has what we call a telephone support system where we are calling approximately 2,000 elders in our community every day. And then we recently have launched a national program called Sage Connect, where we're trying to do that across the country, because obviously we have isolated elders everywhere. The way we're doing it is through a mix of staff and volunteers. In New York City, where Sage is headquartered, this is where most of our staff are. And so we have 35 members of the staff who are making those 2,000 phone calls every day. It's really been kind of an inspiring thing to watch because, we have social workers on staff, and those are folks who are, in a sense, most accustomed to doing that type of outreach. But it's not just our social workers, it's our people that normally work maintaining our facilities. It's our, folks that are normally doing fundraising, or our accountants. Everybody is signing up to make these calls. So it's a real team effort. Across the country through Sage Connect, we're doing it through volunteers. We have almost 1,000 volunteers across the country who have signed up, and we're matching those volunteers with individual elders who need a phone call. And there are several things going on in those calls, right? One is we're making sure that every elder in our community who needs it hears a human voice every day, right? Has some kind of social connection that is not just what they're hearing, on the TV or what they can see online. So some of it is social, but we're also calling to say, are you okay? Do you have food? Do you have the medicine do you need? Are you sick? Do you need help? And when we find out, as we sometimes do, that people don't have the food they need, don't have the medicine, or sick, then the staff person or volunteer has to jump into action and try to address that. So sometimes it's about connecting that individual to Sage's national hotline to get the resources they need. If the volunteer or the staff person is in the same city as the person they're calling, it might literally mean going to the grocery store and picking up some food and bringing it to that person's house, or going to a food pantry. Whatever it takes, basically, to make sure that the older person on the other end of the phone gets what they need and stays safe.
What I'm also interested in what you are alluding to is that, we know that there is more economic vulnerability among older LGBT people than the rest of the population. One, yep, because of what we discussed, which is the absence of kind of community safety nets, meaning the family, the children, and people that typically support our heterosexual peers. But also the aspect, which is more subtle, that sometimes we did not prepare because we did not want to think about aging in the midst of the AIDS crisis. We did not prepare as well as our heterosexual peers. So isn't the economic downturn creating a gigantic risk for the economic stability of LGBT elders? And how do you think we can monitor that and maybe palliate or mitigate the impact on
it definitely people? The downturn is creating financial problems for people in our community, older people who already had financial problems. To your point, Fabrice, we as a community, right, folks in our community enter our older years with about 1/3 less in retirement savings than older Americans in general, and about 1/3 less in retirement income. And that's pretty scary when you think about the fact that most Americans don't have much retirement savings, and we as a community have even less, right? And there's all kinds of reasons for that, right? Some of that is because some of us never thought we'd make it to this age, right? So we didn't think we would need to save, but it's also because over the course of our lives, we haven't had, in many cases, the same kind of opportunities as other people have had because of employment discrimination, because of the lack of partner benefits that have caused us to have to spend more on health insurance because we couldn't get on our partner's health insurance, right? There are all kinds of different reasons for this. And it's important to note that it is worse in terms of financial hardship for people of color in our communities, for trans folks in our communities. So we already are in this place of fragility even before this crisis started, and this crisis is going to make it work. I think there are a number of ways that we're going to have to deal with this right now in this crisis. We need emergency responses. So just to give you an example, we have been very fortunate at Sage to receive an emergency grant from the Wells Fargo Foundation that is going to allow us to stand up an emergency financial resiliency center. And what that center is going to do, it's going to allow elders in our community to get connected free of charge to a professional financial coach who will then help that person figure out there are benefits they could be accessing that they're not accessing? Are there means of financial support that they're qualified for but they don't have? How to make the best of the situation they're in, how to plan for not just this moment but for the future. So that's one example of an emergency response right now, right, in this time frame. But looking forward, I think it's going to create a greater need for community organizations like SAGE, like other organizations that exist to try to help people who are living on the edges financially. The need for the need for those kinds of services and organizations for people who are low income and poor is going to be greater after this pandemic when we get to the other side of it. But one of the scary things is that this pandemic is really challenging many of our organizations. And when we get to the other side of it, I'm worried that many of our community-based organizations will be weakened and we'll lose some of them. So at the very time when we need them more, there'll be less of that support available. That's going to be a big challenge for us as a community.
Yeah, and I think we should not forget that COVID-19 is not miraculously going to disappear in July.
No, not at all.
It's probably around for a while, and therefore the need are going to be there in the long term. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the situation of SAGE and how we can support it. But something that struck me is that you said when you basically describe that preference for the present that sometimes LGBT people and particularly gay men tend to have. You said, we didn't know that we were going to live that long, or we had difficulties, thinking we would live that long, which makes complete sense when at the height of the epidemic, 8,000 New Yorkers died, a year, which is unbelievable. But now among my friends, and frankly for myself too, there is a bit of a preference for the present. We tend to think about, now is the time to have fun, and we have difficulties projecting ourselves in the future. I would love to hear your thought on why that is, given the fact that the HIV epidemic, at least for the majority of the population, is not as virulent as before. And then also, given the fact that even though LGBT people remain underemployed and have still suffered some discrimination, they have more access to economic opportunities. And yet, a lot of us continue to have difficulties planning for retirement. Do you think that this is linked to the fact that, to the ageism? And do you think that there is something we can do about helping people think about life as being 80 years versus about being 40 years?
Well, the first thing I would say is this is not unique to us in our community. I mean, the reality is that, and I know most about the U.S. where I live, but in the U.S., this is a challenge for our people in general. There is a tendency among all of us, regardless of where we live, et cetera, to very much live in the present, focus in the present, not focus on the future. And some of that, whether it's in the LGBT community or beyond, is absolutely tied to ageism, because the reality is that we paint this picture in our minds of what it is to be old. And it's not a positive picture, right? It's a scary picture. It's a picture that makes us stressed out, and we don't want to imagine ourselves as being there, even though if we're lucky, we're going to get there, right? And so because we have that fearful picture in our minds of what it means to get old, and we don't want to attach it to ourselves, we don't plan for it, we don't prepare for it. I think that's true in the society in general. It's definitely true in our community. We see it a lot, and it is, I think, it is about our ageism. It's also about, I think, in many cases, it's very hard to prepare for the future if you're barely getting by today, right? And sometimes people are barely getting by because they have severe financial problems, and so they're barely getting by today. But sometimes it's other things, right? Sometimes it might be stress. It might be, in the work we do, this notion of minority stress, the stress that we carry around inside of us, knowing that we still have to, fight for our own humanity, that we still have to that we can't assume that we're going to be respected and treated for who we are in the same way that everybody else is. So there's all kinds of reasons why we can avoid and be distracted from and be deterred from planning for the future. But the thing is, as a community, we need to work really hard to overcome that, because we don't have some of the automatic support structures that other people have, right? You know, many older Americans enter retirement with very little retirement savings, but they may have 2 or 3 or 4 kids that can help them out in various ways, right? They have other kinds of sources of support. They have church communities and things like that to a greater extent that we do. We, as LGBT people, we are more on our own when we enter those later years, and many other Americans are. So we have a greater need to plan. We have a greater need to get ready than older Americans in general, but we don't plan and prepare at greater rates, and we're going to need to change that.
You know, one of the fear linked to aging is also the fact that there is report that in old age we face discrimination in healthcare, in nursing homes. You know, we hear reports that sometimes nursing homes do not, you know, want to have a clause of conscience that they can refuse gay couples inside their nursing home. You know, first of all, do you think that it is as widespread as we tend to believe, this discrimination in old age based on sexual orientation or gender identity? And also, what is SAGE doing to fight this?
Yep. So I do believe it is as widespread as we hear, and that's based on a combination of the fact that we work with thousands and thousands of elders across the country, and so anecdotally we hear these stories all the time, and we help people navigate them. And there are some studies demonstrating it. You know, there was a study that came out several years ago that showed that 48% of LGBT elders, older adults, are subjected to discrimination when they apply for senior rental housing. And this was a national study, so it was in states all across the country. It was, you know, done by a very expert organization. These are real numbers. So yes, the discrimination is real. It is serious. And part of the challenge is, part of it obviously is that we live in a society where there is still bias and there is still discrimination and ignorance. But another part of it is that, you know, is the fact that many of us enter our later years without support, right? Without a strong support network. And so anybody in this society, if you end up in the hospital, you have to advocate for yourself. If you can't advocate for yourself, then somebody else has to advocate for you. Like, that's a basic. You know, we've had some sickness in my family recently as a result of the virus, and you know, we were all there to make calls to the hospital to make sure, right, that our, you know, loved one was getting the attention that he needed. That's a fundamental. But many folks in our community, when in their later years, they don't have that, right? They don't have that person in their lives to advocate for them, or if they do, that person is not recognized as a family member, etc. So we have to change that. So this is part of, you know, part of what SAGE is doing is we're trying to, as I was talking earlier, help people build those connections, personal connections across generations, so that hopefully when I'm 85 or 90 years old, if I end up in a hospital or a long-term care facility, I've got a friend, you know, who's 70 years old or 60 years old or 50 years old who is going to be able to advocate for me, right, and make sure that I'm being treated the way I should. But we also have a major national training program called SAGE Care, in which we are providing training to nursing homes, assisted living facilities, home care companies across the country, because often this mistreatment is not because of garden variety discrimination. Often it's because of ignorance and people not understanding what it means to be respectful to our, you know, to a member of our community, right? So we have a training program. We have trained more than 70,000 aging professionals, and we provide a credential. It's almost like a good housekeeping seal of approval to long-term care providers across the country, and we have provided that to more than 400 long-term care agencies across the country. It's a new program, and the aging sector is huge, so it still has a long way to go. But I think the solution will be a combination of training programs like that, right, that help providers do a better job of treating our folks, and and taking care of ourselves by making sure that we advocate for ourselves and we have friends that advocate for us. And on advocating for ourselves, SAGE has partnered with organizations like Lambda Legal and the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and more recently HRC, to create resources so that we know what our rights are and we know how to advocate for them effectively.
Yeah, so there is a question, which is a bit of a follow-up question, which is about trans individual. You know, as you know, trans individuals are very reliant on the community around them that is supportive, and I imagine that in aging, sometimes they get extracted, sometimes against their will, from that community of support. You know, what are your thoughts about trans aging? And you know, what do you think we can do to protect our trans sisters and brothers as they enter healthcare facilities and nursing homes that are not prepared to welcome them for who they are?
Well, there's no question that trans older folks face a very specific set of challenges that are in addition to some of the challenges we've been talking about. Just to give you one example, is just kind of autonomy of body, right? And that when people enter into nursing homes or home care, they're losing the ability to fully control who sees their body and who kind of gets that level of intimacy with them. So a number of years ago, it was about 5 years ago now, SAGE partnered with the National Center for Transgender Equality, and we did a year-long project where we brought together experts on trans health issues, trans aging issues, and at the end of that year, we produced a report called Improving the Lives of Transgender Older Adults. The report contains a series of recommendations for what we can do as service providers, as community program providers, and as policy advocates to support trans folks as they age. And so at SAGE, because we are both a policy advocacy organization and a training organization and a direct service provider, we have been working as hard as we can to implement those recommendations within our own organization and encouraging other organizations to do the same. So we have a growing array of programs, service programs, support groups, discussion groups that are particularly designed for trans elders. We also, within our training program, we have a whole training curriculum in which we train long-term care providers in the realities of aging as a trans person and try to equip them with the tools and information that they need to be respectful and effective. We still have a long way to go in this work, but that's, you know, some of what we're starting to do, and working in partnership at both the national level and at the community level with trans-led organizations is really key to that work. Organizations that are trans-led, trans people of color organizations, that partnership and collaboration is key to cracking this nut.
So I think the conclusion of that discussion on LGBT aging and SAGE is that SAGE is going to be more needed than ever, both because the economic burden on our community is probably going to be gigantic as we are in an economic crisis, because of the fact that probably the scapegoating against older people is going to continue. And then also about the fact that the virus is going to continue creating particular vulnerability and even more isolation for people in our community. And then there is the advocacy aspect, which is that something we discussed a little bit offline, which is that we should not forget that despite COVID-19, our fight for equality has to continue. We cannot pause. We discussed the Equality Act, which is definitely key. So what is the situation of SAGE financially? Do you have suggestions on how we can be supportive? And also I would love to know, as a leader, what has been your experience in driving your organization through an unprecedented and unexpected crisis?
Sure. Well, I'll be honest, it's a tough time for SAGE as an organization, as it is for so many organizations in our community. We're looking at significant financial losses because we have been forced to cancel all of our in-person fundraising events for the for the foreseeable future, and that's how we raise a significant amount of funds for SAGE. We are dealing with some other financial losses as well. For example, that training program that I described earlier, quite a bit of that training is fee-based and is a source of revenue for the organization, but most of that training is on hold now. So it's a tough time. It's a tough time financially, and it's really hard because it's a time where our finances are kind of contracting, but the need is growing for all of the reasons we've been discussing. I would say that there are a number of ways that we need help in order to keep doing our work. Certainly one of them is that we need financial help. So anybody who's in a position to make a gift, not only to SAGE, but to our other community organizations that are so important, I would encourage that. But at SAGE, it's not just financial help that we need. We also need help with volunteers, right? Volunteers who are willing to sign up to make a phone call a couple of days a week to an elder who is isolated, and I mentioned a new program called SAGE Connect that we need help with for that. Also, we until they closed down, we had this huge array of programs that people could come to at our SAGE centers and our affiliates around the country, exercise classes, poetry classes, discussion groups, book groups, painting. I mean, so many different things. None of that can happen in person anymore. All of it, as much as we can, is changing over to virtual. So we're actually looking for people who would like to lead a virtual workshop, be a session, one time, something how to do, something you'd be excited to, share with older people in the community. So if anybody is interested in any of those things, you can go to our website at sageusa.org, or you can email at us at development@sageusa.org. But there's so many different ways to get involved and support our work with elders. And you asked about me as the leader in the organization. There's a lot, right? There's a lot going on. I think in some ways I've benefited from the fact that I've been doing this work and this role for a while. So I've been involved in community work before. So I've lived through various crises. I've lived through and worked through the AIDS epidemic. I was the head of SAGE during the Great Recession when we had serious financial challenges then, right? And so I think that accumulated experience definitely helps me do my job to the best of my ability. Having said that, it's not easy, and I have to say that the staff at SAGE is incredible and have been an incredible source of support, not only for our elders, but for me. The conversations I've had, I get so inspired by the things people are doing, putting themselves at risk to bring somebody food and make sure they have it, bringing somebody medicine. I mean, when I think about what some of our staff are doing, it makes me realize that my job, which is basically not on the front lines like that, is completely manageable. We also have an incredible board of directors, and they're out there championing our cause all the time, and they're great mentors for me. So I have a lot of support in this work, and I feel really lucky for that.
Yes, so Mike, you mentioned that you had to cut some fundraisers, and I'm sure that fundraising is more difficult today.
Yeah.
A question that I have to you, not only as the executive director from SAGE, but also someone that work at the SELU, that work at Lambda Legal, that has been in community activism for a while. I have that feeling that, when talking to corporations now and talking to wealthy individuals, you have a bit that feeling that talking LGBT or talking human rights comes across as frivolous because we are in an economic crisis and because there is a pandemic. I had a friend that one day told me kind of angrily, he said, you have to remember that LGBT equality is the product of a strong oil economy. This idea that human rights is a luxury that you consider when you are in a situation of economic growth. And that because now we are in an economic recession, clearly, and maybe for a long time, and because we are in an unprecedented health crisis, that LGBT rights are frivolous, that they are a luxury that is not relevant anymore. What is your advice to me and to other people
Right.
on the call to kind of counteract this argument of like, well, we will think about LGBT rights when we have solved those real problems?
Right. Well, I think I would start with reminding all of us, and we have to remind people in these conversations that we have a conversation about LGBT rights because we have LGBT people, right? But we are people first and foremost, and that many of our people are especially at risk in this time of public health crisis. It's elders in our community, it's people of color in our community, it's trans folks in our community, it's poor people in our community. So first and foremost, this is a conversation about what we need to survive and make it through this crisis as people, just like all of us need help and support in different ways. But when it comes to LGBT rights and LGBT equality, there's an unfortunate reality here, and we talked about it earlier in a different context. What is starting to happen and what will continue to happen in this country is scapegoating, efforts to shift blame to unpopular communities, right? Unpopular groups of people. And if we have learned anything from our history as a community, it's that when we're in a time of crisis where scapegoating and blame is going on, it is only a matter of time before the folks who are doing that scapegoating and blaming, which often is organized by people with political agendas, right? It is only a matter of time before our community is going to become a target in some way, shape, or form for that scapegoating. And when that happens, we are even more vulnerable because we do not have our rights. We do not have our equality. Right. We already know that we're going to be entering into a time when there's going to be a lot of stigma, a lot of blame. And it really raises the stakes as to why it is so important that we need to have our legal rights and our equality protected just as everybody else does. This is something that other folks in many cases can take for granted, but we can't. Right. So I think if anything, the interest in the conversation may be more constricted now, but the need for that protection, the need for those rights is even greater in a time of heightened vulnerability. And for people in our community who are especially vulnerable to this pandemic, those protections are even more important. We were talking offline earlier, the Equality Act, which people often think about that as being about employment discrimination, but the Equality Act is also about protecting people from housing discrimination, protecting people from discrimination in public accommodations. It has language specifically designed to protect LGBT elders. Well, our elders are incredibly vulnerable right now, right? So I know that it can be harder to get people to want to have this conversation right now, but in fact, it's far from frivolous. In fact, it's more important now than it was before COVID-19 started.
Yeah, and I love the reference you make to the Equality Act. At Out Leadership, we've been fighting religious bills in various states in the US that are mushrooming. And one of our big surprise was that lawmakers continue to push those bills despite the gigantic crisis we have.
Yeah.
And what you think is that stigmatizing trans people, specifically trans people, should be the last of their concern today, given all the political decisions they have to make and the horrendous situation of their constituents, and yet they still find time to push the so-called religious bills.
Not only do they find time, they take advantage of this time when they feel as though our community's attention is divided and elsewhere. They take advantage of this time to push those agendas forward, not only against our community, but against other communities. I mean, we see the president using this time as a way to advance an attack on immigrants that he's been advancing since the very first day he got in the White House. But now he feels like he has new opportunities, new arguments, new ammunition, and less likelihood of these things being opposed because people are so preoccupied by day-to-day survival. So it should tell us something, and it should tell our allies and friends something when we see that folks who do not support our humanity and our equality and are seeking to deny that to us are out there pushing even harder to advance that agenda. That means that we have our work to do too, and our allies and friends need to support us in that.
Well, I hope your message is being heard, Michael. And so my last question before we end this really fascinating talk, everybody loves to make projections about what the world is going to look like after the confinement period and potentially after COVID-19. So it's kind of a mean question to ask, but in your opinion, do you think that what we have gone through or what we are going through is going to change the world in meaningful ways? And what are, in your opinion, the few things that might change as a result of the past few weeks and the past few months?
Oh, I think it's definitely going to change the world in meaningful ways. First of all, I mean, this is just a guess, but my expectation is that some of a lot of the ways in which we've come together in big groups and big social groups, theaters, parties, big events, it may be a long time before we can fully do that. So there are all those kinds of things that a lot of people are thinking about and are talking about in society. But I want to throw something else out there. I think that part of what I'm seeing and what we're seeing at SAGE is, and this is a reminder to me, having lived through AIDS and the worst of AIDS, right? So many people are stepping forward, right, to volunteer, to watch out for each other, to watch out for people they don't even know, to watch out for their neighbor down the hall, to do whatever they can. I think and I hope that the spirit behind that will continue. I really hope that this crisis can, generate a new era of volunteerism and activism in our own community that can extend beyond the immediate crisis we're in. We're not going to be out of this crisis for quite a while, and I really hope that, and I believe we can continue these new traditions that we are, creating. The fact is that when we launched our SAGE Connect program, asking people to sign up to call isolated elders across the country, within the first 2 days, we had more than 700 volunteers, right? And that's just continued to grow. My hope and my belief is that spirit of watching out for each other and taking care of each other will continue in our community, and that will be a gift, right? That will be something positive that has come out of this nightmare.
Yeah, well, I'm going to conclude by saying, Michael, that the work you do is incredibly important, and I think in a way it's probably more important than ever, because that intra-generational connection and connection in general is what we starve the most for, and in a way it might also be for us a compensation to the financial and professional loss we might experience. Is that human connection is the most important, and that's right. That's what you foster at SAGE. And then, of course, the advocacy piece is more important than ever. And we think that the Supreme Court might take a decision tomorrow on the 3 LGBT employment case at 10 a.m. And the first thing that we will do is that we will say that's not enough. Whatever the outcome is, even if it's positive, it's not enough. What we need is the Equality Act to protect older LGBT people from the discrimination that you described. So I will also take a minute to thank again our corporate sponsors, American Express, EY, PwC, KPMG, Moody's, Mizuho, PGIM, and Greenberg Traurig. I would also encourage people to go on sageusa.org and see all the opportunities that there is to support your organization, including financially, because those services have a gigantic cost and they have to be sustained. And then again, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time, particularly because you're now running a very big virtual operation. So I know that your time is short, and I really appreciate you taking the time. So on behalf of Out Leadership, thank you. You can count on our support, and thank you also for the message of hope that you delivered about the fact that there is something beautiful in aging, including for LGBTI people, and that ultimately what is probably successful aging is this ability of creating our community of choice, our family of choice.
That's
and
right.
the first step is to invest in it, so that we have people around us as we go through the process of aging.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you,
I
Fabrice.
cannot thank you enough, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you. Good talking with you.
See you soon. Ciao.
Okay. Bye-bye.